Hello, friends. I hope you're out wandering through nature, exploring the natural world around you. Do you enjoy writing about your wanderings? Nature journaling is an awesome, fun way to remember all the adventures you have taken and how you felt during those journeys. If you're looking for some beautiful journals to keep track of all your wanderings, I have several available on Amazon, including some guided journals for children. Start your journey in journaling by clicking on the link in the show notes. Keep exploring the nature around you and keep journaling all your wanderings. Hey friends, it's Paul, and this is the Nature Wanderer podcast. And today I'm going to talk about hot bugs. And you may wonder, what do I mean by hot bugs? Well, let me explain. About a couple weeks ago, I was down in Pennsylvania visiting my brother, and we were outside sitting around in his yard, and all you could hear around us was a loud chirping noise. Not like cricket chirping, it was more continued chirping. And it was really loud. And these are what my sister-in-law calls hot bugs. She said she calls them hot bugs because they are always very noisy in the heat. So when it gets hot out, that's when you hear the hot bugs. Now, a couple weeks before that, I was actually amazed by my grandson, only 4 years old. And we were sitting outside in my yard, and he all of a sudden said, "Do you hear the cicadas?" And I'm like, wow, he knows what a cicada is, and he knows what they sound like. Yeah, so he kind of amazed me, blew me away. But it was kind of cool that he knew that they were cicadas. So that's what we're going to talk about today, hot bugs, which most people know as the cicada. Now, the word cicada actually means tree cricket in Latin. Now, the cicada is not a cricket at all. It's an insect. It has 3 body parts, 6 legs, which is what an insect is. They do have wings. If you've never seen one, they have this stocky body. They're either green or brown in color. They've got these little short antennae and big red bulging eyes. And then they have clear wings on their back. Now there's actually over 3,000 species of cicada around the world. That's a lot of species. Now, we don't have that many here in the U.S., but we do have a lot of different types of cicadas. Now, the cicada does live on every continent except Antarctica. Now, I've said this about other animals, too. They don't live in Antarctica because, remember, it's cold there. Not much lives there at all. So they do not live in Antarctica, but you will find cicadas everywhere else. Now, the cicada is sometimes mistaken or called a locust, but they are not a locust at all. Matter of fact, locusts are in the grasshopper order, which is Orthoptera, while cicadas are in the order Hemiptera, which are the true bugs. So they're not even in the same order when you're looking up classification. So when people say locusts, no, they're wrong. But they do consider them locusts because, well, they act like them. They show up in swarms, which locusts do. Now, cicadas, unlike locusts, are very, well, I shouldn't say harmless, but they do cause very little harm to crops. Whereas locusts, they can devastate crops. So when a locust swarm comes in, they can actually eat about the same amount of food as 35,000 people in one single day. That's a lot of devastation to crops. Whereas cicadas, very little harm. Very little harm to the crops. Now, cicadas, you may wonder, why are they so noisy? And actually, maybe some of you haven't even heard a cicada before. So this is what a cicada sounds like. So now you're thinking, oh, yeah, I've heard cicadas before. They sometimes are very noisy during the day. Other times they're noisy at night. You will hear them all summer long, but they're mostly active, noisy in the springtime. That's when they basically emerge and they look for a mate. I'll go through the life cycle in a minute here, but basically what I mean by emerging is cicadas spend the vast majority of their lives, and sometimes it can be a long life, they spend a majority of their life underground. Yeah, they're cellar dwellers. they spend their lives under the ground, most of it. And they only emerge for a few weeks at the end of their lives to mate and lay their eggs. So they are rarely seen until they're ready to mate. Now, while they're underground, they actually go through what we call 5 instars. Now, an instar is another fancy word for growth cycles. So they're going through these different growth cycles. They don't pupate like some other insects. So instead, they're going through these changes, but not pupating. Now, there's 2 types of cicadas. There's annual and there's periodical. So you may hear people say, oh, the periodical cicadas are out, or the annual cicadas are out. The annual cicadas emerge every single year. So they go under the ground, they spend the entire winter under the ground, and then in the springtime, they emerge out of the ground. They go through a change. They basically climb up onto a tree, and they split their skin open, and they emerge as the adult cicada. So what we usually see with the wings, the bulging red eyes, that's the adult that we usually see. But I have found those casings in the springtime along the trunks of a lot of different types of trees. So in the spring, look at the bark of the tree and maybe you'll see these cicada casings. So it's what the cicada broke out of. So the annual emerges, does this every single year. Now the periodical cicada, they're a little special because the entire brood emerges together. So when you're hearing cicadas in the middle of summer or in the fall, those are usually the annuals because they're emerging at different times of the year. But if you are hearing the periodicals, it's most likely you're hearing them in the springtime because they all emerge together. And then at the end of summer, well, they're underground for several years. So that's the difference between an annual. So the annual emerges every year. They emerge at different times of the year. The periodical, they emerge together. The entire brood emerges together, and they basically disappear at the end of summer underground for several years. Now, it's not the adults that are going underground. It's the youngsters. Okay, so that's the life cycle. The life cycle is the adults emerge, they will come out for a couple of weeks, they will mate, lay eggs, and then the babies hatch, the adults die off, the babies hatch, and they go right underground. And they disappear. Now, it depends on the species of the periodicals. Oh, before I get into that, a brood, I mentioned the word brood, where an entire brood emerges together. Well, essentially, a brood is a group of cicadas which share the same life cycle and emerge at the same time together. So you may have a brood emerging one year, and then you get a different brood emerging maybe a few years later, and then you get another brood emerging the next year. So that's what a brood is. Okay, so back to what I was saying. Most periodical cicadas are in the genus, and you know me with Latin. I did pretty good earlier with species, or the orders when I was talking about the difference between a locust and a cicada. So I actually did pretty good with pronouncing those. Now, this one, a little bit tougher to pronounce. Magicicada. So most periodical cicadas are in the genus Magicicada. And I hope I pronounced that right. Now, there's 7 different species that live in North America. And actually, that's all of them. There's 7 species. All of them live in North America, with 4 species following a 13-year cycle, and 3 species are on a 17-year cycle. So you may hear people say, oh, we got the 13-year cicadas coming out, or we have the 17-year cicadas. Now, what that means is the cycle is where they stay underground for 13 years or maybe 17 years, and then they emerge. They live a couple of weeks, mating, laying their eggs. The babies hatch. They go down into the ground, and they'll be down in the ground for 13 or 17 years, depending on the species. So 4 of the species are 13-year, while the other 3, remember I said there's 7 species in the North America in this genus, and the other 3 species are on a 17-year cycle. So 7 species of periodical cicadas around here, 4 are on a 13 cycle, and the other 3 are on a 17-year cycle. Did I throw enough numbers at you? Because I can throw more at you if you want. No, I think I confused you enough. Always took me a long time to understand all this still. Now, every once in a while, you'll get the timelines lining up, and several broods will actually emerge in the same year. And that's when they get extremely loud. I remember several years ago, I don't remember how long ago, but my niece actually lives down in Washington, D.C. And we were talking to her the one day, and she says, "Oh, we hit that cycle where the cycles lined up, several different species emerged at the same time, several broods emerged at the same time." And she said that Washington, D.C. was just like inundated with cicadas. She said they couldn't even walk down the road. You go at nighttime walking down the sidewalk, all you hear is crunching under your feet. She said you drive down the road, you need your windshield wipers. It's not raining, well, at least not water. It's raining cicadas. Yeah, they're all over your cars. They're over everything. She said it was a mess down there. And you try to talk, you can't. Not outside. It's too noisy. Yeah, it's so loud. Now, it's actually the males who are doing the calling. Like with most species, the males are trying to attract the females. So the males are doing all the calling to call in females. Whoever's the loudest gets the female. So they're screaming. That's essentially what they're doing. The male cicadas are just screaming like, "Hey, look at me. Here I am. Come and get me. Let's mate." Yeah, so that's what all the noise is. It's a mating call. Now, what makes the noise? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, they are doing like crickets do. They're rubbing their wings together to produce sound. But the main noise you're hearing comes from this special built-in instrument called a timbal. Now, the timbals make a clicking sound, but cicadas make the sound over and over again, and it is so rapidly that we hear it as a constant hum. That's the sound of the cicada. It's clicking, but it's really fast clicking, so close together that it sounds more like a hum than a clicking. So rubbing their wings together and this instrument that's built in called a timbal, making the clicking sound. Now there are two types of sounds that they do make. Scientists have discovered that they make one sound, which, as I said, attracts females, and the other sound repels predators. Now, the sound, it's actually about 120 decibels loud. And if you're not familiar with decibels, 120 decibels is about the sound that a chainsaw puts out. It can be heard a mile away. So the cicadas you're hearing, they may not be right up in your backyard in the trees. No, they could be even further away. So 120 decibels, about a mile away. When you hear a group of them, they're singing. You know what you call them? What would you call a group of people singing? A chorus. That's what you call cicadas when you have a group of them singing together. So why are all these cicadas emerging all at once? Why not come out once in a while? Less competition. Well, they're in survival mode. You got to realize these insects don't have many defenses. They have very few defenses. And that means that they are dinner for a lot of different animals because they have no way to defend themselves against these animals. For instance, squirrels eat them. Yeah, there's a wasp that are also cicada eaters. And birds will eat them. So there are a lot of different animals that will eat cicadas. Now, if you have large numbers emerging together, it means you have a big army to defend yourself. Well, actually, The slow ones don't make it, the fast ones do. So they have to be cautious, and hopefully their neighbor gets eaten so that they don't. That's why they come out in these large numbers, because the more you have coming out, it means the greater your chances of not being food, and you'll survive to breed and continue the species. So yeah, some of them get eaten, but not all of them, because there's huge numbers. If you spread out throughout the year, well, you're more likely to be eaten. So that's why they come out in big numbers. At least that's the theory that scientists have come up with. Now, when do they emerge? I said they emerge in the spring. How do they know? They're under the ground. How do they know it's spring? Well, actually, it's the temperatures. When they're under the ground, they can sense the temperature of the soil. When that temperature hits exactly 64 degrees at 6 inches deep, that's when they come out of the ground. They burrow out of the ground, they climb up trees, and they molt into their adult form with wings for flying. Have you seen the shells on the side of the trees? They kind of look like aliens. First time I saw one, I'm like, what on earth is that? So yeah, go out in the springtime and look for these shells. It's so much easier in the spring because a lot more do emerge in the spring. You can find them throughout the year, but I usually find them in the spring. Sometimes I'll find them at the edge of forests, other times in the forest. Close to ponds I found them, but always on the trees. As I said earlier, the adults only live a couple of weeks. Their whole purpose is to breed and lay eggs. Now, the females lay the eggs in the trees. Up to 600 eggs. They use what's called an ovipositor to make rows of pockets in a twig. And they lay about 25 eggs in each pocket. Then they leave them, and the eggs will hatch. When the eggs hatch, the young fall to the ground, and they immediately burrow into the earth to emerge the following year. Or if they're a periodical cicada, then they will emerge every 13 or 17 years. So they do burrow in the ground immediately after they're born. Now, while underground, are they hibernating? Are they sleeping? No, they're alive. They're active. Okay, so underground, the cicadas actually count how many years have passed by noticing changes in the tree sap. The tree sap is what they're drinking. So they will actually use this, it's kind of like a drill. Their mouth is kind of like a straw. So they will go into the roots of the tree and they're sucking up the sap. And they can tell by the changes in the tree sap what time of year it is, when the year has passed, and they're counting that way. At least this is what scientists are believing, that they can tell not by temperature, but by the sap. Now, other scientists say it could be the temperature that they're noticing, the ground temperature, but most scientists are now believing that it's this change in tree sap that they're noticing. Now, whether a periodical cicada will wait 13 or 17 years is determined by their genes. So it's not determined by their nutrition, by the tree sap, or anything else. It's supposedly in their genes. So if they were born from a 17-year cicada, they will be a 17-year cicada. Now, once they emerge, what are they eating? Well, they're using that mouth part, that straw-like appendage, to drink the xylem from a tree. And like I said, the babies, they're actually drinking from the roots. The adults are drinking from branches. So the branch of the trees, they're drilling these holes in, and they're drinking the xylem. Now, this xylem that they're extracting from the tree, whether it's from the roots, from the branches, it's not very nutritious. They need high quantities of it. So they're drinking a lot of this. They take in the sugars. The sugars are in the xylem. They're taking in the sugars and they extract the water. And they get rid of this water. They want those sugars. So if you're under a tree and there's a lot of cicadas up there and it seems like it's raining, but it's a sunny day, it's basically the cicadas getting rid of the water. Don't worry, it's harmless to people. It's just water. Now, they are fairly harmless to plants as well. I mentioned this at the beginning. Okay, the locusts, they can destroy crops. The cicadas, fairly harmless. And the reason is because they're not taking a lot from the plants. They're not eating the plants. They're just taking some of the xylem. If they take too much, it can harm a branch, but most of the time, they're not taking that much. They can actually help plants. How do they help plants? Well, they are aerating the soil. Remember, they're burrowing into the ground. They're moving around under there. They're aerating, adding air to the soil. They're also fertilizing the soil when they die. So when the insect dies, they actually go back down into the soil and their body decomposes and adds nutrients to the soil. So they're fertilizing. So they're actually helpful, not harmful, to plants. Now, scientists are still a little baffled about how cicadas can tell time. Do they have a biological clock? Do they get signals from the trees? Like I said, most scientists believe that they are telling the time by the sap, but they don't know for sure. So how are cicadas doing? Well, if you go outside and it's noisy, you're thinking, wow, cicadas are doing great. But honestly, there's 3 species that are listed as threatened by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So 3 species threatened. 2 broods have actually become extinct. No one really knows why, but climate change is thought to be the cause, as some broods are emerging out of their cycle. So they're not emerging in 13 years. They're emerging maybe earlier because it's getting warmer. And this is one of the reasons why scientists are still baffled about how they can tell time, because they're emerging early and it's causing them to die off because, well, they're getting eaten by predators. So it's a little bit troubling for the cicadas. Remember, they help plants. They're food for animals. So you may not like cicadas, but they do have a purpose. Well, it looks like we've run out of time for today. I encourage you, get outside, listen for the cicadas, look for those casings on the trees, get out and explore nature. Support the podcast by buying, maybe a nature journal, maybe some merch, or you could just make a donation through my Ko-Fi. I encourage you to go to the show notes, check out the details, check out my website. Lots of interesting stuff on there too. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. If you're a long-time listener to the podcast, I encourage you, please invite others. Let everyone else know how interesting the podcast is. I'd love to grow it, and the only way I can grow it is through word of mouth. So let friends know, invite them to listen, maybe have a listening party. Anyhow, it's time for me to go. I hope you enjoyed listening today. Make sure you have a great day. And above all, keep exploring the nature around you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Did you know that plastic is made with oil, a fossil fuel that pollutes the environment? And did you know that only about 15% of all plastic is recycled into new products? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could live our lives without plastic so that we could stop harming the planet? Well, there's a company that wants to help you do just that. Life Without Plastic sells products that will reduce or eliminate your dependence on plastic. They have a large selection from toothbrushes to food storage containers to drinking straws, all plastic free. And it's reasonably priced. So what are you waiting for? Check out all these great plastic-free products and help save the planet. Just click on the link in the show notes to find out more and to start your journey to being plastic-free.